Ascending from the odious decay of their first LP, Cerebral Rot passes from animal to human contagion with a new, more purulent virus on Excretion of Mortality, a return of such festering decrepitude and anatomical canker as befits the true adherents of vile and sick underground death metal. Soaked in the swamp of radioactive sewage, Cerebral Rot's tumor-like growth on Excretion of Mortality bludgeons with a hammering heaviness that few can manage to survive. A methodical focus on attaining maximum barbarism through every aspect of the production, from the meaty, drippy guitars to the immense rhythm section and Schwab's nuclear travesty vocals, to the deceptively straightforward bludgeoning of the songs, exposes a scalpel-like cutting precision to the seemingly base display of horrid malevolence. And then let's finish up. Before leaving Jack and Dino's Soundhouse studio in Seattle permanently uninhabitable for the next 500 years, the pungent, bubbling mess they set to tape on Excretion of Mortality lingers there and everywhere like a malodorous putrescence at the crossroads of the excremental and the existential. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very disgusting and bowel-driven episode of Thunderdome Metal Reviews. I'm the Dr. David Pizzo, Death Metal's official legal representative. I have full power of attorney from Death Metal to represent them. With me, as always, are my brothers in arms, Tracy, the masked chicken slaughter Newport. How are you, Tracy?
I'm doing good.
And Ben, I'm dissertating so fucking hard, Lindsay. How are you, Ben?
Not dissertating that hard, but I am enjoying the shit out of this.
You're posting pictures of books you're reading and saying shit. So to me, that counts. Still counts. As a graduate director, still counts. And then our nearly permanent guest, non-member, actual member, Gabriel Cooper. Gabe, how are you?
Hey, man. How's it going?
He's our featured artist.
He's our featured. That's what I thought. It's like the credits where there's like, I don't know why he's not in the normal credit, but it says all featuring Gabe Cooper.
He's our special guest. He's not our special fucking guest. He's our friend.
Well, I'm glad we're all here to talk about what is a lighthearted, whimsical jaunt through the bowels of existence.
It is actually relatively lighthearted.
It is. I said this to you off recording that this had a certain sense of whimsy that I know is not a word you often hear associated with death metal, but compared to another album we listened to this week, I'll give it away, Slipknot's Iowa, I found that more brutal than this in some ways. Maybe it was the occasional pinch harmonic sort of twee, just to sort of,
Well, if you're watching us on the YouTube channel, you see this album cover, and you'll see it like under your thumbnail on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever you listen to us on. But holy God, you really need to go look this up and see it full size, because it is ludicrously over the top.
Ludicrous. That font is the most death metal font in the history of death metal fonts.
It is.
Like
Oh
they went all the way, man.
They did. And it's four dudes who are in other death metal bands as well that are like, hey, we can get together and do this, and like, let's just go so over the fucking top.
Yeah,
so over the top.
It is super over the top. Let me get the details on it before we get any more into it. So this is their second studio album, Excretions of Mortality, which is a fucking badass title, released on 6/25 of this year on $20 Spin label. Dan Lowndes did the mastering, and somebody named Beto did the recording and mixing. I don't know anything about him, but that's his name. The runtime is 47 minutes and 29 seconds. Ian Schwab on vocals and guitar, Kyle Lindstrom also on guitars, Zach Nell on bass, and Drew O'Brien on drums. As Tracy said, they are members of other death metal bands. So I guess you could say that this is a death metal supergroup, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what other bands they were all in and their status, but this is a callback.
It is.
In a lot of ways. And we've done some retro bands, but most of them have been retro bands, so like new wave of British heavy metal or a little bit earlier. And I have been critical of those bands because the vocalists just aren't capable of doing that. Well, you don't have to worry about that here.
And
granted, death metal is an easier thing to fake your way through if you don't have a classical singing voice. But this is an incredibly good Cookie Monster growl all the way through.
It's bolt thrower grade. And I think that's one of the biggest influences here is both bolt thrower and then the sort of the older Napalm Death, that kind of British sound. And then obviously Morbid Angel, because that's like the template. So that's going on here. I picked this just to address that because that thing I read as our intro on Bandcamp was so ludicrous and over the top. It was very clear they were in on the joke and knew exactly who they were as human beings, worthless. And so they, whether it's the cover art or the font, or they just, as you say, it's callback doesn't even, it's almost like satire. I don't know, but it's a genius and it's amazing. And it you know, it's a really competent effort. Like, you know, I liked Tomb Mold. Tomb Mold wasn't bad. That's probably the band we did most recently that was in this vein. Yeah. But that vocalist was not as good as this. And you know, they just they do a good job of giving just enough space between notes. Here's a harmonic. I mean, because I love death metal, but I admit it can just be, you know, forks in a rock tumbler, like just happening right beside your skull. So there are no instrumentals, I'm sorry, Tracy, or prog elements here to cleanse the palate. It's just more blood. But
it is. I mean, that's acceptable when it's good.
It's good. Isn't this good though? Yeah. I think we all, when we heard it, we were like, this is awesome.
Well, it's that they're so over the top. They know what they are.
Know. They absolutely
and they're
know.
Like, all right, obviously they're fans of the genre. Like, if I was to write a death metal album, how would I want it to hear?
Yes.
If I was to almost be satirical about it. And it's interesting because you hear this, and instead of them going like Cannibal Corpse, just 110% like speed of like and taking the roots into thrash, they're like, we're gonna bring in some doom metal and make it just
doom
slow,
speed
and just bring it in heavy, and just they add just enough of them flourishes in the guitars like to breathe in between like every chorus and every line that really adds to this album.
It is definitely in that doom death genre. Yes. And the thing that I like about it, David hit on it, was the whimsical comment. And whether it's super satirical or they're winking and nodding at the excesses of the genre, I kind of think it's more of the latter than necessarily the former, because I don't really feel like they're making fun of it.
No, I think they love it. I think
that's just it. I do too. But it's just fun. It's fun to listen to, and I'm glad that there's a space and that this type of metal. Death metal isn't my favorite thing, but I love good death metal, and this definitely falls within that camp. And just to see guys who are playing it because they love it, in some ways it reminds me of Red Fang that way, even though they're not the same genre at all.
I see that. Yeah, they definitely are playing death metal at doom speeds, which is why they remind me of Bolt Thrower, because I think Bolt Thrower occupied that space a lot, especially on like the Fourth Crusade. They're kind of lumbering along as they flay you and tear you apart in the streets of Constantinople. So yeah, I was here for this. It was awesome. I wouldn't necessarily listen to this every day, but I definitely, I did listen to it every day this week because it was my homework.
See,
correction, I did listen to it every day.
This is an album you're going to play in the car with your wife in there. Maybe your daughter, but not your wife.
She heard it. I always ask her, like, would Mommy like this? She's like, God, no, absolutely not. Hell no. No, she doesn't talk quite like that, but that's the sentiment. She knows. She likes Iowa, y'all. She was like, who's this? I mean, so, you know.
Wow.
It's the pathos, man. The brutality.
That's impressive.
I mean, well, think about the Alphas, Gabe. It's so much worse to them even than the Zoomers. Like
That's
they're not even going to know the planet not cooking. Like it's just going to be a thing that happens.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna jump in and say, like, anybody could write, a ridiculous, piece of, advertisement like the one that they did on their Bandcamp page, but not everybody can back it up with the chops that this band did. You know what I'm saying? Death metal isn't one thing, or it doesn't have to be one thing. And this especially is the opposite of notness. And they're really experimenting a lot with the tonal palette in each of the individual tracks. So the album doesn't sound samey ever. There's maybe one track on the entire thing that sounds like traditional death metal, whatever you want to call that. They keep it interesting. Right? They're doing an homage, but they're doing an homage that is not the same old. It's let's take these ingredients and mix them around in different ways and see what comes out. Kind of. You can see that in tonal palette too, with like, maybe you got the Cookie Monster vocals, which are kind of a staple, but then you have not the same guitar tone throughout, not the same type of drumming throughout. And not the same kinds of song composition as well.
Yeah, that I would agree with all of that. I'm glad you mentioned wound up getting around to the Cookie Monster vocals, because that's the one monotonous thing in here, is the fact that those are so kind of one note, but all the other stuff around it works so well and it's so varied that it doesn't really matter that much. I'm not going to, I'm not to foreshadow into grading already, but in some of the other death metal that we've done, I have been somewhat harsh on, well, the vocals are just so similar that you can't really tell. And the music too, when one track ends and another one begins, you don't have that problem here at all.
He's just better than the guy on Tomb Mold. Not to pick on them. I like that album too. But again, that's the one that's most recent in mind to me. Well, you have to understand what he's saying. He certainly sounds better than Chris Barnes.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Like, I'll take this focus over Chris Barnes any fucking day.
Any day.
Well, the thing with Tomb Mold is I think Tomb Mold was even more experimental musically than this was. But to me, I would put these two bands, I think that's a really good comp, because I think of them in the same headspace. But if we go back to like Deeds of Flesh, when we did that, I much prefer this to Deeds of Flesh.
Deeds of Flesh was much more tech death as well, where it's more based around the intricate, fast guitar work, and less so. This has that groove to it. Like, you can just sit there and just bang your head to it, and like
both are.
It's not necessarily like, it's not neck breaking, but it's got that. If you were to play this and people in your car and people heard it, they'd be like, "What the fuck?"
They would say that.
It just sounds vile. Like, it's just putridness coming out of it. Like, you play Check That, and it's just gonna be like just like you play Deeds of Flesh in your car, and somebody hears it. It's just gonna be the reverb of guitars and noise. But they hear this, they know it's fucking vile. They know it's like just putridness is pouring out of it, just like, oh, this is where the plants next door to your house die while it plays.
It's true. They left the studio uninhabitable for 500 years. I think that both the death metal at Doom Speed, which I know Ben is here for, and they have that's why I compared them to the grind thing in Britain, because Napalm Death, Carcass, and Bolt Thrower, because of their, and I guess we'll talk about this a lot more when we review the Carcass album, because of their roots in American blues music. Like, that's where it comes from, right? By way of like Led Zeppelin. And I feel like even more than America, the British scene was dependent on that input to exist. Anyway, I feel like that, because I don't think it's a new metal thing. I think that was a weird, I think that was a convergent evolution a little bit, and also kind of predates it. But it's definitely groovier than the other thing is, of course, that Deeds of Flesh album. What a hot mess. I mean, it was like he was dead, and it was just ugh. There was a lot of pathos, whereas these guys there's none of that here. This is just silly, and I love it. Like, this cover.
You should feel happy knowing. You should feel happy knowing that death metal is in good hands coming out of 2020.
Yeah, these guys. Yeah, no,
these guys.
5 more albums of this shit. Yeah, no, and
I'm here for it.
I'm here for it. I love that death metal's come back.
I think, they kind of roll back to when we were talking about streaming services and the detriment they are to music, in the sense of like payout. You wouldn't have this, like,
we wouldn't.
You wouldn't have the chance to find these bands like they are now without these streaming services, because they are allowing you, to go and look at these albums. Because just looking at their Spotify, their monthly listeners, Cerebral Rot has 8,894. So like, this is really like literally like finding that underground tape at a tape trading in the early 90s. Just like, oh wow, here we go. Like, you're this getting a hold of really some of these lesser known bands would be far more impossible to do in previous generations of music.
Sure, but I'm going to give that more to Bandcamp than I necessarily am to Spotify. And granted, I did listen to this on Spotify when I was doing it for the review, but the first time I was on Bandcamp, and Bandcamp does allow that direct access for a lot of these smaller bands. And these guys are on a label. I mean, $20 spend may not be a big label, but they are a label that is legitimately doing vinyl pressings and everything like that. So, it's not like they're just uploading it to the cloud and letting whatever happens happen. They have a record label that is producing a physical product.
They're making tapes, cassette tapes, again, specific for this album. Is that I think it's on.
Yeah,
Bandcamp.
no, that's the super hipster thing now. Is that we vinyl is old hat now. It's gone back to cassette.
I feel like Cerebral Rot on tape is just a level that I don't know if I can go to. Because I had
I think it's sold out anyway, David. So
I'm off the hook then. Because I straight up had like Death and the First Malevolent Creation and Morbid Angel on fucking tape. I had some of those death metal albums.
I don't think I had any Death on tape. I had a thrash, a shitload of thrash on cassette, but I don't think I had any Death.
It was for my Walkman because I had a CD player at home, but I wanted to listen to metal on the go.
There you go.
And so that meant tapes, man. That first fucking Death album I listened to over anyway. I had Danzig 3. Anyway, it was a limited selection. And I think it was fucking BMG. What was that thing, Tracy, you mentioned? The
BMG Music Club?
Yeah.
I think that's how I got a lot of them.
Yeah.
I don't really want this Madonna album, but I will take Cerebral Rot and Malevolent Creation.
Oh, yeah. Well, shall we talk about some songs?
I think it may be that time. What else can we say? Also, Seattle. Who even knew? Seattle.
Yeah.
Oh, these names.
I'll go first.
Please.
Excretions of Mortality is a great opening track and title track. I mean, just, man. And look at these album titles, as David said. I'm going to go through them for the people who are not looking at the screen, who are listening to us on whatever service you're listening. Excretions of Mortality, Vile Yoke of Contagion, Spewing Purulence, Bowels of Decrepitude, Drowned in Malador, Rushing Innards, and the closing track, track 7, for those of you keeping track at home, Crowning the Disgustulent Breed of Repugnance, in parentheses.
I love the parentheses. To the break of dawn.
Yes. So again, all of these tracks are special in their own right. Man, this is one of those albums that you really, and it's only like 40 something minutes. Listen to the entire thing, because it really, you're really going to get a kick out of it, especially if you are a fan of death metal. But Excretion of Mortality, a great opener. Spewing Purulence is good. Drowned in Malador, Rushing Innards into Crowning the Disgustulent. Just a great closing track. I mean, they opened and closed this album incredibly strong, in my opinion.
I don't think there's a bad track on this album. I think it rolls from start to finish, and this is a good death metal album. It's a good death metal album.
It's just a good metal album. It's an excellent death metal album.
Yeah. Well, I'd be hard pressed to put this in some of my not like metal friends I know. Like, you need to check this out, and they'd hear it, just like, oh god, like they'd feel dirty probably listening to it. But agree, I think it opens and closes fantastic with Excretion of Mortality and Crowning the Disgustulent. That's a mouthful to say.
It really is. It reminds me also, I should have said this earlier, of the first Fear Factory. It has some of that same atmospherics, and his vocals are pretty similar without any clean vocals of any kind. None of that's going on. I kind of like them all, y'all. I think this is, as Tracy said, just a rumbling ride on a roller coaster of decrepitude and retching innards. I like them all, and I agree. It's short enough. It works as an album. Listen to the whole album.
Instead of Space Mountain, what you get is going through a slaughterhouse instead of a cattle being.
I know, this is
that's
like
the entire ride.
Huss Alley or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a bad scene, but it's a fun album. I like it. You should listen to all the tracks, everyone.
Yeah, I agree with what has been said. There are no bad cuts on it, but if I had to pick, I would pick the odd numbered ones. Those are my favorites. Yeah, I mean, especially the last track. It has all of the right ingredients that each of the fine tracks on the album possess individually. That's actually what I wrote down.
Awesome. I love it.
But really what's impressive here is composition and tonal palette, especially like the opening track. It's like there's layers of sounds, there's squealing guitar, there's like really creepy guitar that comes out of nowhere. There's like these, nausea-inducing chromatic intervals. It's like, it's got a lot to love. So yeah.
Completely agree. So now that makes it time to grade this thing. David, you picked it, so the sombrero is yours, sir.
I think this is an excellent album. This is a B+. I don't have a ton of history with the band. It's so over the top, but yeah, I think it absolutely earns a B plus. And I feel like if I listen to it more, it may even start trending into A territory. But I feel very solid about that grade.
So
people who like death metal should get this album.
Is it on your short list for the year so far?
It's on there. Yeah, but I think Tracy, I already have ranked the top 5 so far. I'm not as weird as you. I haven't listened to hundreds of albums, but what I have listened to, I've already ranked. It's up there, but I don't think I think better stuff than this has come out. But this is a lot of fun. It's definitely in the running. I think it's going to be in the top 10.
It's one of the funniest, or not funniest, but funnest albums of the year.
It's so fun. Yeah. So yeah, right for me, it's a B plus, trending upward.
And I'm going to fall in line with David there. It's a B plus, an 88. It's a solid death metal album overall. And the more you hear this album, the better it sits. I think like that first time, you're like, chunky, meaty, and after every time you're sitting there. The 4th, 5th listen, you're just sitting there just banging your head to it and just going with it.
That's necrotic fasciitis setting in.
Yeah.
It eats away at your soul. That's the flesh-eating bacteria.
Like it had some
Chunky.
crocodile or something, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to, they've said it. I think this is an excellent album as well, so I'm going to give it a B plus.
All right, I didn't think I was going to be rocking the boat here, but I think this is a legendary album. It's really, really fantastic.
I fucking love it.
I mean, head and shoulders above a lot of death metal records that I've heard before. So,
stand fine.
I love it. No, I love that outcome for everyone.
Yep.
And as I said, it's trending upward. The more I listen to it, Tracy's right. It just, as the rot sets in, you're like, yeah, this feels great. As your face slides off
great
onto the floor.
Treats into your soul. Yes.
It's that dog sitting there, everything's on fire. Like, this is fine.
I also want to, it's totally that. And I want to point out that death metal's time has come, y'all. Right? Like in terms of the putrid, infectious disgustitude of existence, like has any genre ever more accurately captured the spirit of 2021 than death metal? I don't think so.
No.
It has bowels of decrepitude written all over it.
Yeah, it has bowels of decrepitude written all over it. And death metal was just ahead of its time. That's what future metal historians will say. Like, death metal came too soon, but its moment arrived as the Anthropocene plagues and people's own stupidity consumed the race. Like,
I don't know. You can see death metal as a birth right out of the Reagan era. So, I mean, it kind of came at the right time.
That's an arc that hurts. Anyway, so yeah,
it's just we're coming back around to it. Everything from the 80s is coming back.
Coming back around again.
Back. The horrible era that we're living in is coming back, and death metal's coming back.
Yeah, but I didn't have, necrotic fasciitis or whatever, necrotizing fasciitis in my face at the time, and now it's,
now you do.
It's in my nasal spray I take every day. Well, hot damn, Tracy, this was a fun ride. I appreciate you gentlemen going on it. What the fuck are we doing next, Tracy?
Next, we are continuing our journey through a band discography and looking at the second album of Slipknot in Iowa.
That album is less fun than this one. Not saying it's bad, but oh god, yeah.
Yeah, there are opinions that are going to be shared about that album. So
interesting. I
can't
wait.
Got a funny story about that album.
You would.
We always like a funny story. Here on Thunderdome Metal Reviews. Thank you again, Gabe, for being with us as our featured artist, and thank you everyone for playing along. And go check this album out on Thunderdome Metal Reviews.